Hello, everyone. We got Kyle here this morning. He's going to teach us how to set up and work moving heads. Go, Kyle.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me. My name is Kyle. I'm from BF Light Shows and RGB Sequences, and we are going to go over moving heads. Um, we're going to go over the model in the Layout tab, how to configure them and set them up. Then we're going to jump over into sequencing, and then after sequencing, we'll cover importing and making any adjustments necessary, and then we'll wrap up with some different troubleshooting steps. So just a real quick little bit about me. I'm Kyle Bostick. I live in Garden City, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit. I've been doing this for 5 years now. And this is pretty much my whole life now. I do this 24/7. So I basically don't have any hobbies. It is lights all the time. So um, it is a very fun hobby. It's very enriching. It's great for the community. We have thousands of people come to our house every year and thank us for putting on a show. And we just enjoy using our show as a way to collect donations and things and give back to charities in our community. So um, definitely exciting and welcome everyone to this awesome hobby. But all right, so that's it for the slideshow, and we will jump right over into xLights. And then I'm going to turn off my virtual background because I got moving head behind me. So we'll demo some of this live. All right, so when you get your moving head, you want to add the model. You can get it from the vendor that you purchased the moving head from. So if you get it from Magical Light Shows, Lauren Christmas Lighting, Matos Designs, myself, your Pixel store, whoever you're getting it from, they should be able to provide you with a model that's accurate for the model that they're selling. And then you'll have a download. Basically, it'll say, moving head.x model, and you'll come over to this import option, and then you'll just kind of drag and drop, and then you can select your actual X model. That'll drop in and it'll look something like the ones up here. If you don't have that model and you need to create it from scratch, you can come over to this DMX dropdown, and then you can select the moving head advanced model. And then that will also give you this. And then what you'll do is you'll basically look at your manual for the moving head, and then you'll have to actually configure the model. So if you click over here, it'll come in, it'll have a name. You can give it whatever name you'd like. With the new advanced model, it's going to have this fixture identifier. And if you have 8 moving heads, you're going to select the 8 different moving head models. So number 1 would be 1, 2 would be 2, 3 would be 3, etc. If you have more than 8 moving heads, you have to double them up. So say you have 16, you could make 1 and 2, moving head 1, moving head 3 and 4, moving head 2. Because this fixture option here, it only allows you to have 8 different unique moving heads. All right. Number of channels, that'll be defined by the manual in the box that came with your moving head. In this case, it is a 16 channel moving head. You'll have your pan motor. That is your left and right or axis movement. In my case, that is channel 10. It moves 540 degrees. Mine are set to move clockwise. If yours move counterclockwise, you can select this reverse option checkbox, and that will basically just flip the rotation inside xLights. You can also use channel fine up here, and that just gives you a more fine-tuned left and right or x-axis movement. And then we also have to define the tilt motor. In my case, that's channel 12. You also have a channel fine if you want to use that. Most moving heads have a range of motion of between 250 and 270 degrees for tilt. If you mount it upside down, you can check this upside down checkbox. So if it's mounted on a truss like you'd see at a concert and it's upside down and kind of pointing downward, that's when you would make this checkbox here. Couple other notable points on this is in the pan motor, this orient to 0, that is which direction the moving head is physically mounted on your house. So right now the moving head is pointing at us. So we would want the orient to 0 to look something like that. Now it's going to match the way our show is set up. And that is important for the moving head effect that just came out. We'll get into that real briefly in just a little bit. And then orient to 0, what that means is how many degrees does the moving head need to spin in order to be pointing over your crowd? So in this case, it would need to be 270. And basically what that would do is that would do 270 degrees of rotation, and then it would be facing over the crowd. What the new moving head effect will allow you to do is basically grab a graph, and it'll have a little box, and you can basically drag that slider around, and then all the moving heads will go the same direction. So it's a really cool feature. It's kind of difficult to use and to sequence if you're trying to do kind of advanced movements. So I don't think any of the vendors have adopted it yet. I think they're still kind of working out some of the kinks with it, but real great idea, awesome concept, and I can't wait to have that more implemented across the board. The last couple things over in the layout is color properties. If you plan to use colors with the moving heads, most of them have a color wheel. There's a little disc inside the moving head that will spin around and light up different colors. And then you'll just kind of define what those colors are and what the values are. And then you'll also have a dimmer and a shutter channel. And then if you need to adjust the beam properties, like what the actual beam looks like, you can do that in this beam properties. All right, so that is it for the actual moving head fixture. I'm going to go real briefly over how to set up the groups for them so they can be sequenced kind of in a group setting. Let's set this back to 180. All right, so what you're going to do is you are going to grab your create new single line up here. And it's basically just going to create a single line of lights. You're going to set the number of strings to the number of moving heads that you have. And then you are going to select under controller, use start channel. And then individual start channels, you need to check this box. And then what you're going to do is basically click on start of model. And then you are going to select your moving head. And then you are going to set the channel that corresponds with the string you're trying to control. So in this case, I named it dimmer. The dimmer channel is 3. So it would be a start channel of 3. And you're going to do that for each moving head. So you'll have moving head 1, channel 3. Moving head 2, channel 3. Moving head 3, channel 3. If you have a different brand of moving head and you're kind of mixing and matching, you can still use this method. You would just have to make sure that the last number, the channel, is corresponding with the different moving heads. So say one of them is using channel 2. You could set this at channel 2. You could have these ones at channel 3, and then you could have kind of mix matching moving heads. I don't recommend doing that, but if you are going to mix them, you can still use this method. And then probably the most critical part of all of this is under string properties. You have to come down to this string type and change it to single color. By default, it will be under RGB nodes. And if it is RGB nodes, then this will not work. So your moving heads will not be responding correctly. The number one thing I get as a sequencer with questions regarding moving heads are, hey, I imported it and this isn't working. And it doesn't matter who the sequencer is, when you set this up wrong, it's not going to work for you. So I deal with that support question very often, and that is the number one culprit, is that this string type is not changed to single color. All right, so we have the 5 different groups here: color, dimmers, pan, shutter, and tilt. You could also do focus, you can do frost, you can do gobos and prism, rotation, whatever your moving head offers. But those are used less often by sequencers. Most of the time, those aren't used. These are the common ones that are used between many of the different sequencers. So now what I'd like to do is kind of jump over to sequencing. And I want to cover just a couple things with the different moving heads. So we can come over to a new sequence. And we'll create an animation for this. We'll just use 40 frames. And if you are using a lamp-based moving head, you'll need to create a sequence to turn them on and off. So what you'll do is you'll grab this DMX effect and you'll drop this onto all of your different moving head models. And I already turned mine on, so you can see now it's on behind me. Turn this off for right now. And what you're going to do is basically copy this across all of your different moving heads. You could also create a group for this, so you just have to do it once. But and then what you're going to do is come in here in your channels and you're going to find your lamp control. And then you are going to set this to the value that your manual says. In my case, it is 255 for at least 5 seconds. I usually run that a little longer just to make sure. And we can then update all of these. So now all of these are outputting the same thing. What that'll do is that'll create a little spark inside the moving head itself and ignite the lamp, kind of like an old school projector. It will then start to warm up. And then after, I would say about 5 minutes or so, it will reach its, operating temperature and its brightness and all of that. And then from there, you don't need to do anything with this lamp control. You can leave it at 0. It won't be included in most of the sequences. At the end of the night, you'll want to do the same process. So you'll have a sequence like this, and you'll find your lamp control. In my case, it's 165. So you would do 165 for all of the different moving heads, and you would run that for 5, 10, 15 seconds. I run them just for the default 30. And then you want to give your moving head time to cool down after that. So even after you have lamped them off, you want them to stay powered on. There's a fan inside them that helps cool it down. After about 5 to 10 minutes or so, you can go ahead and you can remove power. So I have mine all on smart outlets. So they power on about 15 minutes before my show. I run a scripting sequence that will trigger the power outlets to turn on, then it will lamp all of them on. Then the show will just wait 15 minutes. And then from there, all the moving head lights are on, the lamps are all on and ready to go. Then the show will run, it'll play all the sequences throughout the night. At the end of the night, you'll have your closing PSA, hey, thanks for coming, yada, yada, yada. And then it will run the lamp off command. And then another 15 minutes or so after that, it will trigger the smart outlets to turn off and then kill the power. Otherwise, you're going to be running the fans and everything else inside the moving heads all night long and 24/7, and that's not good for them. So you don't need to do that. So just make sure you give it a little bit of time to cool down at the end of the night. All right, so now we can kind of jump over into sequencing them. So I'm going to come over here. We'll do create a new sequence. I'm going to do a musical sequence so you guys can actually see what the process for this kind of looks like. And I picked kind of a short song for this. Normally I sequence higher than 40 frames a second, but for this we'll just do 40 frames. Let me see. Hopefully we don't blast anybody's eardrums out with this. John, can you let me know if you hear this audio play through the Zoom?
Will do. I don't right now. I do not hear it. When you shared, did you share sound?
I believe so, but let me cancel and do it again. Let's try this again.
When was the last time I
I hear it now.
All right, perfect. So this is the Greatest Show Christmas Vacation mashup that I created a few years ago. it's pretty short, under a minute. So we'll run through kind of how we hear the different sound in here, what we kind of pick up on, and how we would go about kind of sequencing it. So
We're gonna have the best looking house in town, Russ.
So from that first clip, you hear the woes, and that the original xLights Around the World sequence that they did for that, they had pinwheels kind of going up the house and kind of create that fanning look. And I thought that'd be cool to kind of recreate with moving heads, since the xLights Around the World one didn't have that. And then you hear that real strong drum beat, the double pulse there. So what I ended up doing is kind of making like a crisscross out of them. And that just had like a high dramatic point that really kind of captivated people and got their attention. So, you see two of the beams go up and then those go off, and then you have different beams kind of do like a crisscross pattern. So to create something like that, we have our different groups here. We're going to grab an on effect and we're going to throw that on the shutter group. And we want that to span the entire sequence, and it's just % for the whole song. You want to make sure there are no transitions. You want to make sure there are no weird settings like layer 1 is a mask or any of that. Render style default. You don't want sparkles on, more for any of that. You just want a very basic on. And then from there, we're done with shutters. Don't have to do anything with that for the rest of the sequence. And then we have dimmers. Dimmers are basically what turn the light that you see on and off. So we can come in here and you can double click on MH dimmers and then double click on strand 1. And then you'll see node 1 through 8. Node 1 is moving head 1, node 2 is moving head 2, and so on. If you wanted to create a effect that turns all of the moving heads on at the same time, you could grab another on effect and throw that on your dimmer on the actual group up there. If you only wanted it to control one moving head at a time, you could come down to the node 1, node 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, however many you have. And then you can do different things like an intensity at 0 at the end, so then it will kind of fade on and fade off. So if we click on this,
We're gonna have the best looking house in town, Russ. We're gonna have the best looking house in town, Russ.
so you can see the beam behind me, it comes on, it's real bright, and then it kind of fades out. You could kind of get a little more creative with this and drag one in the front, one in the back, and you can reverse this. So you have a start intensity of 0, end intensity of 0. I'll make this just a little bit shorter, then I'll zoom in on this. But
we're gonna have the best looking house in town, Russ.
And then now you see that it kind of fades in and fades out. The timing isn't right, so we'll kind of deal with that real quick. Zoom in on your timeline. And I like to start with where I want the light to turn on and off. Once I have that in place, then I worry about the pan and the tilt, and then I'll get that in place. So let's line up the audio with the light first, and then we'll go from there. So it starts right about here. With moving heads, there is just a slight delay when moving heads actually start getting that command and start to turn on. So we'll give that just a little bit of a buffer there. So something a little more along the lines of this. So now we have a duration of about 3 seconds or so. So now it would come on, basically everything would fade on and then fade back off. And then we could throw these effects where we have that kind of crisscrossing pattern on different moving heads. So maybe we take the effect we throw here and we throw that on the first moving head and maybe the 8th moving head. So now 1 and 8 are going to do that whoa kind of pattern. And then we have that kind of drum beat pattern that's, fast and abrupt right about here.
We're gonna have the best looking.
And we don't want the slow, dramatic fade on for that because there's an instant kind of drum beat. So we want that to be bright and, a real fast flash. And then we could do something like put that on number 7 as well. Or if you only have 4 moving heads, you could do this on like 1 and 4, 2 and 3 kind of thing. And then if we wanted to, we could create another pattern where we do something a little different in the middle. One too low here. So there we go.
We're gonna have the.
All right. So now we have the first little section kind of in place. Now we can collapse our dimmers and then double click on our MH pan. And then we want to make sure we give the moving heads enough time to get into position. Depending on the moving head you have, it may take a couple of seconds before it can spin all the way around and actually get into the position that it needs. So we'll come over here and node 1. So once you're on the node level over here, you're only going to be adjusting channel 1. So we can come over here and we can do a ramp, and we'll do a ramp of, we'll say about 50, which is going to be basically like 90 degrees or pretty close to it, depending on where or how they're mounted. And then if we did 128, that would be halfway. That would be like straight up in the sky. So if we wanted to go, from 50 to 128, we could create this value curve with a ramp. And then basically what it's going to do is, oops, I'm sorry, I have that on tilt, my mistake. So 128 is going to face over your crowd. That's kind of your key value that you want. If you want to face to the left, that is going to be 86. If you want it to face to the right, it would be 172. And those values are based on the 540 degrees, and then the 540 degrees, which is the rotation for pan, and then DMX only goes to 255. So roughly speaking, you get a little over 2 degrees per 1 DMX value. So 90 degrees is roughly 45 in DMX values. So if you need to do, right now they're facing towards the left. If I wanted to go behind the house, if I did 45, now it's pointing behind the house. If I did 90, now it's facing the right. If I did 128, now it's facing over the crowd. 172, back to the right. It has done a full 360 at this point. If we wanted to go back behind the house, we could go to 215 or so, 212. Now it's facing back behind the house again. and then 255 will be back to the other side all the way around. So it's done that full 540-degree rotation. So we'll make these 86, just so we get a little bit of movement here. We'll leave that one at 0. And you notice that this is going to stop just a little bit ahead of where the music starts, and we want the moving head to start moving. So we have those basically putting the moving heads into position. Now we'll come over to tilt, drop those in the same position. These will both be 50. And then now we're working on tilt. So now we want to do that 50 and 128. So we'll click update. And then we do want to extend the pan because we want the pan to stay in the same position. We don't need that to rotate at all. And then basically we get that effect where the moving heads are now moving up. I'm not sure why moving head 1 stopped lighting up there. So they get in a position, and then they go up. And you notice that the light was still on when the moving head effect ended. So it started to actually drop down, and you saw that. So what you'd want to do, and that is this one right here, you can either extend your DMX values over here, or you can cut the light off a little bit sooner. Both will give you the same effect. And then now we need to work on this next set here. We can come in and get these into position. And then basically we're just trying to create some type of crisscross pattern. Your 128 is going to be center. So to keep things symmetrical, I usually will put 128 on the middle 4 and 5, or 1 and 2, depending if you have 4 or 8 moving heads. So now those two are facing directly center. If I were to take 10 away from, or if I added 10 to this and made it 138, now it's kind of pointing a little bit more towards the left. If you did, 148, it's going to go just a little bit further. So now it is going to kind of create a fan away from each other. If we wanted that to be towards each other, we could do the opposite. Instead of adding to 128, take away from 128. So now we're at 108, and now it's facing over to the right. We would make this one the 148. Now they are going to crisscross. And then we can take our effects on pan, we can throw them on our tilt. And just from playing with these for the last few years, I've noticed going straight up in the sky doesn't look nearly as good as if they're a little bit lower and kind of pointing over the crowd. So if you did something more of like an 80-degree range, now they are going to be more pointed over the crowd, and it's going to create more of a wow factor than if they were straight up in the sky. All right, so now we have those two. So now we have 4 different moving heads kind of doing something, but I don't want the effect to match on all of these. So right now, that's kind of the pattern we have. If we wanted those to face away from each other or do, a different pattern, maybe facing out, however you want to kind of create that effect, you can. But what we would do is basically come in here and adjust this value. So we could do something like 118, and then it's just not quite as dramatic. If we did 118 there, we would do 138 on this one. And then when you go to actually see them, so now they're kind of facing away from each other, and that doesn't look super great. A lot of this is kind of trial and error, and you can kind of play with what you think looks good. And, you know, if you have some kind of idea in mind or a vision, and then just kind of building towards that. So now we have the middle two doing a, and then the outer two facing out. I think that's what I ended up doing for the actual sequence. But now we'll just kind of play this back real quick.
We're gonna have the best look.
So now we have the upward movement followed by the sharp cutoff of it, and then the dramatic bass beat. And then basically we would just kind of continue that pattern throughout the song, or as long as that sequence of song is matching. If you wanted to break it up, I ended up changing quite a bit. So not every movement was exactly the same in the sequence that we actually put out, but this is kind of how you would go about lining it up. I didn't get into doing all of the audio breakdowns, like you could break down the bass beats and vocal tracks and all of that. I don't have enough time to cover all of that, but I wanted to give kind of a brief covering of how you would go about sequencing something, kind of get it started and lay everything out. So typically, like I said, I start with the dimmers. I will get the lights on where I want them. Once I see the part of where the moving head light is actually turning on, then I go back and I will play with the dimmer, or I'm sorry, the pan and the tilt, and I'll adjust the timing accordingly to make sure that the moving head can actually move in that range in that time. Speaking of that, when you look at your moving head on the pan and the tilt, there is something called a slew limit. And basically what that does, or what that means, is it is defining how fast your moving head can actually move. This won't affect the actual motor, but the rendering inside the xLights preview. So if you have that set at 0, your moving head is basically going to spin there instantaneously in xLights, but it won't actually do that in person. So you may have an effect where you make the moving head go left to right in a split second, but your moving head takes a second to actually do that movement. Your sequences will look great in the xLights preview, but when you go to actually look at it on the house, they won't line up. So that's super important. That's more if you're sequencing yourself and that kind of thing. If you're buying sequences, most of the vendors have moving heads that are sequencing them, and they have already preset their slew limits to what their moving head can do. If you use indoor moving heads like myself or Magical Light Shows, they use indoor units. Those are significantly faster. If you are using outdoor units like Pixel Pro displays, Pixel Perfect sequences, or Visionary Light Shows, some of those, they use outdoor models that are going to move a little bit slower. You can still get great effects with that, but if you're using outdoor moving heads and you're purchasing indoor moving head sequences, unless the vendor that you're getting them from kind of tones those effects down, they may not work as well on the outdoor units. I can't speak for all the other vendors, but myself, I tried to make most of our sequences slow enough to run the outdoor models. I have a few of them here so I can test them. And then for my personal home show, I go back and I redo all the values to make them take advantage of the speed of the indoor units. So that's something I do. So anyone from BF Light Shows, they should keep up with the slower outdoor units, but just something to kind of keep in the back of your head. All right, so now got about 20 minutes left. So I want to cover importing and making adjustments, and then a few troubleshooting things. So if you have a sequence
You got 10
and
minutes.
oh, all right. Okay, thanks, Jen. So I am going to change all of these so they are facing in a different direction. And then I'm going to import a sequence and show you how they would be kind of messed up from where we would actually want them, and then how to make that adjustment. While I'm doing this real quick, does anyone have any questions you want to throw them in chat? And I'll try to answer any of those while I'm running through this part real quick. Sure, Eric. So the reason I recommend having them mounted to the side instead of facing forward is because they have that 540-degree rotation limit. If they are starting to the center and facing over the crowd, there is a block, so they can't go one direction. So it depends if it moves counterclockwise or clockwise, but you're limiting yourself. You can only go one direction. You can't go the other direction. So if you wanted to start a sequence and you wanted your two middle moving heads to kind of do like a fan out at the initial start of the sequence, you wouldn't be able to do that. What you'd have to do is give it enough time for your moving head to rotate, at least one of them, 360 degrees, and then it could fan out. If you have them pointed to the side, now they could rotate that 270 degrees or that 90 degrees, and then they could do that movement and go each direction. So you just get a little better movement out of that. Like I said, you can still mount them facing forward, but you have to do that full 360 degrees, and then you're limited at that extra 180 degrees, which is going to be behind your house. So you wouldn't be able to do a full like circle behind the house if you wanted to, once you're at that 360. All right, so now these moving heads are all facing kind of behind the house. So fog and haze, you don't need them. It does help. It really plays a lot on atmospheric conditions. So if it is super cloudy or there's a lot of particles in the air, then the moving heads will show up a lot better. They show up a lot better at Christmas time here in Michigan than our Halloween show. Our Halloween show, sometimes it's hit or miss. 4th of July, it was kind of hard to see them, but Christmas, clear as day. So it really depends on the atmospheric conditions, how much particles are in the air. If it's raining or snowing, those are great times to see beams. All right. So we'll go ahead and we'll clear all that out. So I am just going to import a sequence, and then like I said, it is going to be facing the wrong direction, and I'll go over how to make those kind of adjustments. So I just use the auto map since I have the same number of moving heads, and then we'll go in and we'll make the adjustments. So you can see here are all the effects that I actually had in here that I just kind of started recreating with you guys a few minutes ago. We'll go ahead and render this.
We're gonna have the best looking house in town, Russ.
And you notice they're all facing to the side, so it doesn't look good. So that's where we would need to come in here and kind of make those adjustments. So what you can do is you can drop a pan effect or a DMX effect on pan here, and then you can make some adjustments. So right now they are all set at 86. If we drop them all to 0, that is going to basically just face the right of the house. So now they're all facing towards the right. That still doesn't get us where we need to be. So now they look like they're the correct direction, but they're behind the house. So we're getting a little bit closer. So now what we would do is we can go over to tilt and we can grab this long effect that'll go over the whole sequence. And we'll make that 255. And then one critical step is you'll need to select all the node level effects and then come to layer blending. And for pan, you'll right click, you'll say bulk edit, and then set that to additive. And then for your tilt, on the tilt group, you'll want that to be normal. And then on the tilt nodes, you'll want to set those to subtractive. Now they are all facing over the crowd. So in a matter of 30 seconds or so, I was able to account for that 90-degree rotation and fix it. So I basically just had to add those two groups or add those two effects and then change the render style of the nodes. And now they're facing over the crowd, they're facing correctly, and we can go ahead and run this sequence.
We're gonna have the best looking house in town, Russ.
I think you might be.
All right, so that leaves me with about 4 minutes to cover kind of troubleshooting and answer any questions. So like I said, the most common troubleshooting thing I see is that the groups are set up incorrectly and they are set as RGB nodes versus anything else. The other thing is how to make the adjustments that I just covered. Those are by far the two most common questions that we see. Other things that may pop up are how do you map from 8 moving heads to 4? What I would recommend doing is grabbing your middle two. So if you have a sequence that has 8 moving heads, your middle is going to be number 4 and 5. Make that your 2 and 3. And then your 1 and 8 can be either 1, 2, or 3 for that vendor that's using 8, or you can basically pick any one of those. So basically you just want to grab that middle and then you can pick any of the outside ones. Question in chat, how do you deal with wet snow or extremely cold weather? I have mine in domes because I have the indoor ones. They held up all last season. I've used them over the summer. They've been on my roof since I'd say like June something because we ran the 4th of July show. I did end up putting like a barbecue cover over the dome because the sun will hit the dome and it kind of acts like a magnifier and it will burn or melt the moving head. So I put a barbecue cover over them for the month of August and the rest of July. Those will come off for our show in September and they'll stay off until January when I take them down. I haven't had any issues with it being cold. We had days where it was negative 20 degrees here last year. They worked every single day, worked rain, shine, had no issues with that. I do have some of the outdoor units too that I used for the 4th of July show. Those ones, they're just out in the elements. Those ones also didn't have any issues. I'm in Michigan, so it doesn't get super hot here. Like the hottest day we've had here is probably in the 90s. But they haven't had any issues with the high heat, and I don't anticipate them having any issues in the cold coming up. So by default, when you remove power from the moving head and it's not getting a signal, it will point kind of down in a way. So right here, it is not getting any DMX effect whatsoever. And by default, it just kind of goes down into that downward pointing position. That will keep the sunlight from directly going out of it or into it. If your moving head does sit directly pointing up with the power off and the sun hits it, it'll act as a magnifier and it will cook it from the inside out. So you want to make sure that you avoid that. If your moving heads do end up pointing straight up, you want to cover them or do something to prevent them from going back to pointing straight up. I will try to cover that real quick because I think I'm out of time, but. And I've done this class a few different times. So there's an xLights gem where I spent like a half hour just on setting up the single strand setup. So if you look through the xLights gems, the moving head class, I did it on July 10th of this year. But I spent a good amount of time and did it slow to really dive into that. But basically what you're going to do is drag a single strand out. You're going to set the number of string to the number of moving heads you have. In this case, we'll say 4 nodes per string is going to be 1. Controller, we're going to change to use start channel. Check the individual box. Click the 3 dots for string 1. Select moving head 1. Set the channel. We'll do this for dimmers. So there's that one. There's that one. There's that one. And if it's easier, you can just copy and paste this and then just hit the enter tab so it saves. So now we have moving head 1, moving head 2, 3, and 4, all channel 3. And then scroll down, string type RGB nodes. That needs to change to single color. Save. Give that a new name. And then one last thing with those, if you click on your controller and go to the Visualize tab, you'll notice that none of those strings are actually assigned to the controller. Those only exist in xLights with overlapping channels in order to get everything to work. So you're only going to drag your moving heads over to the serial ports. Can you have Tom's sequences with moving heads and the new? So all of the old sequences will still work, but that's why I wanted to cover this, because you'll need to have these groups set up in order to use any older sequences. So the sequences aren't automatically converted to using the new effect. So Tom's older sequences, I know because I have a handful of them, they use a combination of either this string method or sequenced on the actual moving head itself. But the import process would follow what I just showed you, as opposed to using the new effect with the new group and the new settings that Mark's going to cover later.
Okay, we're out of time now. I want to thank Kyle for putting on this wonderful class again. And we'll see everybody in the next room.
Thanks, everyone.